In a distant corner of the galaxy, an alien species called the Koreans had established their dominance. For decades, they had controlled an entire sector of space, and their power was unmatched. Their cities shimmered on multiple planets, and their fleets ruled the stars. The Koreans believed they were invincible. No other species had dared challenge them, and they had grown comfortable in their position. The Koreans were a peaceful species by nature, preferring diplomacy and trade over conflict. They had long ago abandoned the idea of war, relying on their advanced technology to ensure their safety. They had no reason to believe that anyone could threaten their empire. As a result, the Koreans had grown complacent. Their defenses were strong, their fleets vast, and they believed they were safe. But safety can often lead to arrogance. One quiet day, a strange signal began to pulse through the Korean fleet's communication network. It was faint, a whisper in the void of space. At first, the Korean commanders ignored it, assuming it was just an anomaly, something easily dismissed. After all, the galaxy had been peaceful for years, and there had been no signs of any new threats. They believed they were the rulers of the stars, and nothing could challenge that. But the signal persisted, growing slightly stronger with each passing moment. It was unlike any communication the Koreans had encountered before. It wasn't an alien race attempting to make contact or a distress signal. It seemed deliberate, calculated. Something was coming. The Koreans, sensing the strange disturbance, decided to investigate. They sent out a fleet of reconnaissance ships to trace the source of the signal. As the ships ventured further into the unknown region of space, the feeling of unease began to grow. There was a growing tension among the Korean officers, but they couldn't explain why. It was just a feeling, something intangible. They brushed it off as paranoia. Suddenly, one of the reconnaissance ships sent out a report that made the hairs on the back of the Korean commander's neck stand up. It was a sight unlike anything they had ever seen. There, on the edge of their territory, was a massive object. Something enormous, something that couldn't be explained. It wasn't a space station. It wasn't a ship of any kind they recognized. It was just there, and it was moving. The commander ordered his fleet to follow the strange object. As they approached, the first real signs of the object's nature began to appear. It wasn't just one ship. It was a battleship, larger and more advanced than anything the Koreans had ever seen. Its design was sleek, but terrifying, and its weapons systems were unlike anything in the Korean arsenal. The feeling of unease turned to fear. This was no ordinary vessel. This wasn't something they could easily ignore. The Koreans had ruled the stars for centuries, but now they realized they might have underestimated the galaxy itself. For the first time in a long while, they feared what lay ahead. The commander's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him. They had been so certain of their safety, but now it seemed they were not alone. Something far greater was coming, and it was heading straight for them. The silent skies of the galaxy were about to be broken wide open. The Korean fleet moved cautiously through space, the strange object now clearly visible on their scanners. The commander of the lead ship, Captain Relic, stared at the screen in disbelief. No matter how much he zoomed in or adjusted the sensors, the object on his display didn't make any sense. It was a ship, but not like anything the Koreans had ever seen. It was huge, far larger than any ship in their own fleet, and it was moving steadily toward Korean space. "Captain, are we sure this is not a malfunction?" one of the officers asked, his voice shaky with uncertainty. Relic shook his head. "This is no malfunction. There's something out there, something beyond us." He ordered the fleet to stay at a distance and continue observing. The Koreans had never been afraid of new species. After all, they were a peaceful people. But this was different. There was something about the ship that sent chills down his spine. It wasn't just the size, but the way it moved. It wasn't gliding or drifting like a typical ship. It was almost deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. As they drew closer, the Korean fleet finally got a clear view of the enormous battleship. It wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress. The sleek metal was almost blinding in the starlight, its surface covered in intricate patterns and alien technology the Koreans had never encountered. And despite its size, it moved with the grace of something far smaller, far more agile. Captain Rallick's pulse quickened as the realization began to settle in. This ship wasn't just any ship. It was an advanced warship, and it was heading straight for them. "Captain, we've tried every form of communication," an officer said nervously, "but they haven't responded. They're not even hailing us. It's like they don't even know we're here." Rallick's brow furrowed. Or they don't care. The Koreans had always relied on diplomacy and technology, but this was different. The Koreans were used to talking, to sending signals, and negotiating their way through the stars. But this human ship wasn't responding, and there was no sign it intended to stop. Rallick ordered the fleet to prepare for what might be a confrontation. Though deep down, he hoped it wouldn't come to that. The Korean fleet was advanced, yes. Their ships could tear through most obstacles with ease. But this human battleship was unlike anything they had faced before. They had never seen anything this powerful. As they moved into range, the Koreans could feel the pressure rising. This human vessel hadn't shown any sign of aggression yet, but the silence was deafening. The uncertainty of the situation gnawed at the officers. What was the human ship's intention? Was it a test? A challenge, or something worse? And then it happened. The massive human battleship suddenly turned its focus toward the Korean fleet. The Koreans held their breath, waiting for the next move. Every officer on board the ships could feel the weight of the moment. For the first time in centuries, the Koreans found themselves facing something that could not be understood, something that didn't follow their rules. They were no longer the only power in the galaxy, and this human battleship was the first sign that their reign might soon be over. The ship's enormous guns powered up, and a low hum filled the air. Whatever the humans intended, the Koreans now knew they were no longer safe. The galaxy was about to change. Captain Rallick stared at the massive human battleship through the observation window, his thoughts racing. The Korean fleet was positioned strategically, but none of them had ever expected to face something like this. The humans were unlike any species they had encountered. The lack of communication from the battleship was unnerving. Silence in space felt like a heavy weight pressing down on them. The ship's guns glowed faintly in the distance, as if they were charging up. Rallick ordered his officers to be on high alert, though a feeling of dread settled over them all. He couldn't shake the thought that the humans were preparing for something far more devastating than anything the Koreans could anticipate. "We should communicate with them," said his first officer, Sergeant Vora, her voice filled with uncertainty. "We don't know what they want yet. Maybe they just need to be understood." Rallick clenched his fists, his gaze never leaving the battleship. "I don't think they're interested in talking. Look at the size of that ship. It's like they came here prepared for a fight. They're not sending us a signal of peace. They're preparing for war." Sergeant Vora hesitated, then nodded. She knew the captain was right, though the idea of facing this unknown enemy filled her with fear. The Koreans were used to negotiation, peace, and treaties, not open conflict. Rallick's voice broke through the tension in the control room. "Send a message. Let's see if they respond, but prepare for the worst. They might ignore us, or worse, they might attack." The communication officer sent a warning message across the void, hoping that the human ship would at least make contact. The seconds felt like hours as the message drifted into the endless silence of space. Everyone held their breath, waiting for a response. But none came. The human battleship remained still, as if it hadn't even noticed the Korean message. Then, something happened. The massive ship's weapons came online with a low hum, and the Koreans saw the first real sign of aggression. With a flash, the human battleship fired its main weapon. The blast hit one of the Korean ships directly, its shields flaring for a moment before collapsing under the sheer force. The ship disintegrated into a shower of debris, Its crew instantly lost. Panic spread throughout the Korean fleet as the blast echoed in their ears. The humans had just made their first move, and it was a decisive one. Rallick's heart pounded in his chest. His officers scrambled to make sense of the situation. The alien fleet had been caught completely off guard. The firepower of the human battleship was beyond anything they had prepared for. And now, with the first ship destroyed, there was no turning back. The Koreans quickly activated their weapons, returning fire with all they had. But their weapons had no effect on the human ship shields, which seemed impenetrable. Each blast from the Korean ships was absorbed by the shields, leaving the human battleship unscathed. Rallick's mind raced. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a declaration of war. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here for peace. They were here to dominate, and the Koreans were now at the mercy of a power they didn't fully understand. Fall back. Rallick commanded, though deep down, he knew it was too late. The Korean fleet was no match for the firepower of this human warship. The true threat had only just begun to unfold. On board the human battleship, the crew had been waiting for this moment, though no one could have predicted just how quickly it would come. The commander, Captain Marius, stood tall in the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen where the Korean fleet was scattered in panic. The first shot had been fired, and the battle was now inevitable. "Report," Marius said calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding in front of him. His first officer, Lieutenant Area, glanced at the readout. "The Korean ship has been destroyed, Captain. The fleet is trying to regroup. However, they are hesitant. It looks like they didn't expect such power from us." Marius nodded, his mind already calculating the next move. He had expected this. The Koreans had been complacent in their superiority, believing they were untouchable. But humanity had always been underestimated. Now, it was time to show them why that was a mistake. "We're not here to destroy every last one of them," Marius said, his voice firm. "We want to send a message. They need to understand that humans don't negotiate. We dominate. Prepare the second wave. Let's break their will." Aria's eyes met his, and there was no hesitation in her expression. The crew of the human battleship knew their commander well. Marius wasn't a man who spoke in threats. He spoke in actions. And now, those actions would make the galaxy remember that humanity was not to be ignored. As the human battleship continued its steady approach toward the Korean fleet, Marius could feel the weight of history pressing on him. This moment would shape the future of humanity in the galaxy. They had been silent for so long, but now their voice would be heard, loud and clear. The galaxy had thought they were weak, but this was proof that humans had power, will, and the courage to use it. "Captain," Aria interrupted his thoughts. "The Koreans are launching another attack. They're sending a fleet of reinforcements. They don't seem to know how to handle us." Marius glanced at the incoming ships on the screen. More Korean ships, smaller than the first fleet, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. However, to Marius, they were nothing more than distractions. He turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare to engage them. Full power," he ordered. "We'll break their lines and force them to retreat. This fight ends now." The officer nodded, fingers moving swiftly over the controls. In the distance, the Korean ships began to charge, but their attack was disorganized. The sight of the human battleship, still standing strong and undamaged, had shaken them. The Koreans fired, but their blasts were easily deflected by the human ship's advanced shields. Marius watched as the human crew, trained for moments like this, reacted with practiced precision. The battleship's weapons roared to life, and in a flash, multiple Korean ships were disabled in a series of controlled strikes. The Koreans had relied on their numbers, but humans didn't need numbers. They had strategy, they had technology, and above all, they had determination. The Korean fleet, once so confident, now seemed like a pack of frightened animals, desperate to find an escape route. Marius knew they wouldn't last much longer. This wasn't a battle for survival. It was a battle for dominance, and humanity was winning. "Remember this area," Marius said, his gaze fixed on the fleeing Cryan ships. "This is only the beginning. The galaxy will know that humans don't just survive. We conquer." With the Cryans retreating, Marius couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for. The rest of the galaxy would soon learn that the human resolve was not something to be underestimated. Captain Relic stared at the view screen, his heart pounding. The human battleship had wiped out one of the Cryan ships in an instant. The fleet was now in disarray, with the remaining Cryan ships scattered across the battlefield. The commander's mind raced as he considered the impossible reality that was unfolding before him. "How did they do that?" Vora asked, her voice shaky. "Their weapons, they're more powerful than anything we have." Rallick took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The situation was dire, and there was no time to waste. "We can't let this continue," he muttered. "We need to fight back, regroup. We still have the numbers to overwhelm them." "Do you think we can?" Vora questioned, her gaze fixed on the human battleship, which now loomed large on the screen. Rallick's eyes narrowed as he watched the ship. It hadn't moved, its guns were still raised, and its shields were holding strong against every blast the Cryans threw at it. It was like the humans were waiting for something, waiting for the Cryans to make their next move. "Yes, we can," Rallick said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The human ship is powerful, but it's only one. We have the strength and numbers. If we can overwhelm them, we might stand a chance." He quickly issued orders to the remaining fleet. "Gather all ships. Prepare for coordinated fire. We're going to break their shields and destroy their weapons. It's our only chance." The Cryan fleet, though scattered and disoriented, began to regroup under Rallick's command. They formed a loose line, each ship firing as one. The alien fleet had always relied on strength and numbers, and now they had to use that to their advantage. If they could push back the human battleship even a little, they might gain the upper hand. For a moment, it seemed like their plan might work. The human ship's shields flickered under the concentrated fire, and Rallick allowed himself a brief moment of hope. But the human ship didn't retreat. Instead, it responded with a force that made the entire fleet tremble. The human battleship fired back, its weapons cutting through the Cryan ships like a hot knife through butter. One by one, the Cryan ships were destroyed, their hulls bursting apart in flames. Rallick could only watch in horror as his fleet was dismantled. Each blast from the human battleship was precise, calculated, and unrelenting. The humans weren't just fighting, they were dominating. "We're losing," Vora shouted, her eyes wide with panic. "We can't keep up with them. They're too strong." Rallick's mind raced. This was no longer a battle of strategy or numbers. The humans had shown that their technology, their firepower, and their will were far superior. The Cryans were being crushed beneath the weight of that power. There was no escaping it. "Fall back," Rallick ordered, his voice breaking through the panic. "We need to retreat. Regroup and get back to Cryan space. We can't win this fight." The remaining Cryan ships attempted to flee, but it was too late. The human battleship was faster, more powerful. It pursued them relentlessly, picking off the stragglers with ease. The battle was lost. The Cryans had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. As Rallick watched the destruction unfold, he realized the truth. The Cryans were no longer the top power in the galaxy. They had been overtaken by a species that knew only one thing: domination. And no matter how many ships the Cryans sent, it wouldn't change the fact that humanity had already won. The Cryans were beaten, and the humans weren't finished yet. The galaxy had just entered a new era. Across the galaxy, news of the Cryan defeat spread like wildfire. What had started as a single battle between the Cryan fleet and a lone human battleship had now turned into a galaxy-wide shockwave. The Cryans, once thought to be invincible, were scrambling to understand what had happened. Their proud empire had crumbled before their very eyes, and the rest of the galaxy was left in stunned silence. Captain Relic sat in his command room, staring at the remains of the battle on his screen. His once powerful fleet was scattered, with only a few ships left to limp back to Korean space. The loss was devastating, not just in terms of ships and lives, but in reputation. They had never imagined a human ship could destroy their entire fleet with such ease. "This can't be real," Vora said, her voice shaking. "How did they do it? How did one ship wipe us out?" Relic didn't have the answer. His mind was too clouded with defeat, but deep down, he understood one thing: the humans were not what they had expected. The galaxy had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. The Koreans, who had once ruled with the confidence of invincibility, were now facing an enemy that didn't play by their rules. The human battleship had proved something crucial. Humanity was not just another species. They were a force that would not be ignored. In the vast halls of Korean High Command, leaders from other planets watched the destruction unfold. Their once strong alliances with the Koreans began to crack. If the humans could do this to the Koreans, what would stop them from coming for the rest of the galaxy? The message was clear: no one was safe. The Koreans had been the largest and most powerful empire in this sector of space. They had been the gatekeepers, the protectors of peace, or so they thought. Now, the fear that once belonged to the humans was quickly shifting to everyone else. If humanity could bring down the Koreans, what would happen when they set their sights on the rest of the galaxy? Among the many species in the galaxy, leaders and warriors began to rethink their positions. Trade routes, alliances, and military strategies were all reevaluated. The Koreans had failed to maintain control, and now it seemed that the human battleship was only the beginning. On Earth, the news was just as shocking. No one had expected the humans to be at the center of a galactic conflict. The government scrambled to process the incoming data, but deep inside their military headquarters, a new sense of pride was emerging. They had done it. They had shown the galaxy that humans were not just survivors. They were conquerors. Captain Marius, the commander of the human battleship, stood at the bridge of his ship, staring at the stars. He didn't feel victory the way the Koreans might have expected. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was simply the reality of the galaxy. Humanity would not back down. They didn't negotiate. They dominated. "Captain," Lieutenant Area said, "scouts report that other alien species are watching us. They've never seen anything like this before." Marius nodded slowly. "Let them watch. Let them understand that humanity is not to be underestimated." The galaxy had just awakened to the truth. The age of the Koreans was over. Now the universe would learn to fear humanity, and Marius was determined to make sure that the rest of the galaxy knew this new power was only just beginning to show its full strength. As word spread across star systems, the galaxy trembled, unsure of what would come next. The humans had opened the door to a new era, one where they would no longer be invisible. This time, the galaxy would have to reckon with the human resolve. The galaxy was on edge. For years, the Koreans had stood as the dominant force, their empire stretching across star systems with ease. But now, in the wake of their devastating defeat, the rest of the galaxy had begun to rethink its own place in the universe. Word of humanity's power spread quickly, and for the first time in centuries, the Koreans were not the ones holding the reins. Captain Relic, though shaken by the loss, was not one to give up easily. He knew that the Koreans could not simply surrender. They would fight back. It was the only way they could maintain any sense of control over their fate. In the cold void of space, alliances were being formed, plans were being made. But one thing was certain: the humans were a new threat, one that could not be ignored. Back on the human battleship, Captain Marius stood at the front of the bridge, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed to stretch on forever, a reminder of the endless possibilities for humanity. But there was something else, something looming in the distance, A message had come through from the Galactic Council, a coalition of alien races, warning humanity that their actions would have consequences. Marius knew what that meant. The galaxy was about to respond, and they were not coming with open arms. "Captain," Lieutenant Aria said, her voice filled with tension. "Scouts report that a massive fleet is heading toward us. They've joined forces, the Krians, the Taurians, and the Vraxians. They're coming to stop us." Marius didn't flinch. He had expected this. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, but now that they knew what they were capable of, they were coming together to try to crush them. But it wouldn't be that easy. Humanity wasn't just a threat. They were a force of nature, ready to make their mark on the stars. "How many ships are they sending?" Marius asked, his tone calm yet firm. "Thousands," Aria replied, her eyes scanning the data on the screen. "They're bringing everything they've got." Marius nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. But there was no fear in his heart. If anything, the challenge ahead made him more determined. The Krians had learned the hard way not to underestimate the humans. Now, it was the turn of the rest of the galaxy. "Send a message," Marius ordered. "Tell them we're not backing down. We didn't come here to surrender. We came here to dominate." The crew moved quickly, sending out the warning. But it wasn't just a message of defiance. It was a statement. Humanity had no intention of retreating. They had made their mark, and they intended to keep it. The fleet of alien forces grew closer, and the tension on the human battleship was palpable. Captain Marius stood tall, his mind focused on the coming battle. The Krians and their allies might have thought they could intimidate humanity, but they didn't understand. Humans fought with everything they had: heart, determination, and the will to never give up. The standoff was about to begin. The alien fleet, massive and imposing, approached the human ship with its weapons raised. The galaxy had finally come together to stop the humans, but they didn't know that humanity was not just a species. They were a challenge that the galaxy wasn't ready to face. "Prepare for battle," Marius said, his voice filled with a quiet confidence. "Let them see what happens when they try to break us." The countdown began, and the entire crew braced themselves. The universe had never seen a battle like this before. And when it was over, one thing would be certain: humanity would leave its mark on the galaxy, whether the rest of the universe liked it or not. The battlefield was eerily quiet after the storm of explosions and flashes of light. The massive fleet of alien ships, once so confident in their combined strength, now lay in ruin. The human battleship had taken hits, but it had withstood the onslaught. It was an unstoppable force, a symbol of human resilience and power. The alien alliance had thrown everything they had at the humans, but it wasn't enough. Captain Marius stood on the bridge of his battleship, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The alien fleet was retreating, many of their ships crippled, others drifting aimlessly through space, damaged beyond repair. The remaining forces had either surrendered or fled back to their respective star systems, broken and humiliated. "Captain," Lieutenant Aria said, her voice filled with awe, "they're pulling back. We've won." Marius didn't show any emotion. There was no victory celebration on his face. The mission was simple: to prove humanity's strength, to make it clear that they would no longer be ignored. And they had done just that. The alien alliance had underestimated them, thinking they could intimidate humanity into submission. But they were wrong. The humans didn't negotiate. They dominated. "We didn't just win, Aria," Marius said, his voice low. "We changed the galaxy." Aria nodded, understanding what he meant. The humans had proven their might, and the galaxy would never be the same. Species that had once looked down on humanity were now forced to reckon with them. The fear that had once been directed at the Krians was now directed at the humans. Across the galaxy, leaders of other races watched the broadcast of the human victory. The Krians, the Taurians, and the Vraxians had all been brought to their knees. But what did this mean for the rest of the galaxy? What did it mean for the other species who had once thought they were safe from human influence? In the command rooms of alien capitals, officials stared at their screens in disbelief. The humans, once seen as a weak species, had now proven themselves to be the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Their technology, their tactics, and most importantly, their resolve had shattered the established order. The galaxy was no longer a place where species like the Koreans could sit at the top, untouched. Humanity had claimed its place. Back on Earth, the news was met with a mix of awe and confusion. Most humans had never imagined that their species would take center stage in a galactic conflict. Yet here they were, a power to be reckoned with. The people of Earth watched, captivated, as their leaders prepared for what came next. The war might have been over for now, but the true battle for the future was only beginning. "Captain," Arius said, breaking Marius's thoughts, "what do we do now?" Marius turned to face her. The answer was clear. Humanity had made its mark. The galaxy would soon come to understand that Earth was not just a planet to be ignored. It was a world of warriors, of survivors, of rulers. The time for negotiation was over. "Now," Marius said with quiet determination, "we wait for them to realize that we're not the ones they should fear. We are the ones who shape this galaxy. And this is just the beginning." As the human battleship drifted through the void, the galaxy awaited its next move. The universe had learned a valuable lesson. Humans were not just part of the galaxy anymore. They were a force that would not be stopped. The era of human dominance had begun. The silence that followed the battle was heavy, almost suffocating. The galaxy had watched, breathless, as the human battleship stood strong against the combined forces of the Koreans, the Taurians, and the Vraxians. Now, as the shattered remnants of the alien fleet drifted through space, the galaxy began to process what had just happened. The world had witnessed the rise of a new power, one that could no longer be ignored. Captain Marius stood on the bridge of his battleship, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look like a man who had just won a battle that would be talked about for centuries. Instead, he appeared calm, almost distant. He had known the stakes from the beginning. It wasn't about victory. It was about sending a message. And that message had been delivered loud and clear. "Captain," Lieutenant Arius spoke, breaking the silence. "The galaxy is already reacting. We've received dozens of messages. Some are from races seeking to understand our intentions. Others are from those who wish to negotiate." Marius looked at her, then back out at the view of the vast expanse of space. "Negotiation," he said with a half smile. "I think they've learned enough about us." But there was no arrogance in his tone. It was simply a statement of fact. The battle had proven that humans didn't need to negotiate for survival. They didn't need to beg for respect. They had earned their place in the galaxy, and now it was time for everyone to accept that fact. As the fleet drifted toward their home base, the reports kept coming in. The Koreans had lost their grip on power, and the other species in the galaxy were beginning to rethink their approach to humans. Some saw the humans as a threat to their dominance. Others recognized the undeniable strength humanity had shown and started to consider how they could align with the new power. The galaxy was in turmoil, but it was the kind of turmoil that came with change. On Earth, the people watched in awe as their leaders met in closed-door meetings to discuss what had just transpired. The humans had never imagined they would be in this position. Just a few years ago, they were a quiet, unassuming species on a small planet. Now, they were a force in the galaxy, and the entire universe was taking notice. The United Nations of Earth held an emergency session. The entire world was watching, and the leaders of Earth were more aware than ever of the responsibility they now carried. They had always been told that humans were weak, that they could never stand against the more powerful species in the galaxy. But now, that very idea was shattered. "We have one chance," the president said, standing in front of a room full of world leaders. "The galaxy will be watching every move we make. We can either join the ranks of the galaxy's strongest, or we can retreat into the shadows." The choice is ours. On the battleship, Marius knew what had to be done. The victory was just the beginning. They had proven they could hold their own. But now, the real work began. They had to establish their place in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through intelligence, diplomacy, and strength combined. Prepare for the next phase, Marius ordered. We're not just going to survive in this galaxy. We're going to shape it. The human fleet slowly turned back toward Earth, the stars stretching out before them. The galaxy would never be the same again. The humans had proven that they were not just a species to be tolerated. They were a species to be respected. And as the universe watched, the human journey into a new era of power and influence began. The stars stretched out before Captain Marius as he stood on the bridge of the human battleship, gazing into the vast expanse of space. The battle was over, but the galaxy was far from settled. Humanity had proven itself, showing that it could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful forces in the galaxy. But Marius knew that the hardest part was yet to come. They hadn't just fought to win. They had fought to change the galaxy. Captain, Lieutenant Aria's voice broke through his thoughts. We've received several more messages. The Crayons are asking for peace talks. The Taurians are curious about our military technology. And the Vraxians, they're demanding a meeting with us. Marius turned to face her, a slight smile forming on his lips. It seems the galaxy is finally paying attention. Aria nodded, her face serious. And the others, Captain, the ones who haven't responded yet. Marius thought for a moment. They'll come. They always do. This isn't just about winning battles. It's about showing the galaxy that we won't be ignored. We're not just a species to survive. We're a species that will shape this universe. Humanity had proven itself in the most brutal way possible. But Marius knew the fight hadn't been for survival. It had been for respect. The universe had seen the strength of the human spirit, and now they would have to reckon with it. The Crayons, once the galaxy's dominant power, were no longer the ones in control, and humanity had taken their place. The messages from the galaxy's leaders continued to flood in, but Marius knew that this wasn't the time for diplomacy. Not yet. The humans had earned their victory, but it was up to them to decide how they would wield their new power. As the human fleet approached Earth, the crew was filled with a sense of quiet pride. They had done what no one thought possible. They had turned the tide of the galaxy's balance of power in favor of humanity. But Marius knew that there would be challenges ahead. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Prepare for landing, Marius said, his voice steady. We have work to do. The human battleship descended toward Earth, the planet's surface coming into view. The world had watched in awe as the battle had unfolded in space. The news had spread across every continent. Humanity had proven itself not just as survivors, but as conquerors. The galaxy now knew that humanity would not back down. The question was no longer whether they could survive, but whether they would rule. As the battleship touched down on Earth, Marius stood at the front of the bridge, staring at the planet below. His mind raced with the possibilities. The challenges of the galaxy lay ahead, but humanity had something that no one else had: determination. They were a species that had faced overwhelming odds before and had always found a way to overcome them. We've done it, Aria said quietly, her voice filled with pride. We've changed the course of the galaxy. Marius nodded. This is only the beginning. The galaxy will have to learn that humanity is not just a species, it's a force, and we're just getting started. As the human fleet settled back into Earth's orbit, a new chapter in the galaxy's history was about to begin. Humanity had taken its first step into a future where they would no longer just survive, they would dominate. The universe would soon learn what it meant to face the power of humanity, and nothing would ever be the same.